From the White House to around the world, the fallout from the Trump National Security Team discussing airstrikes on an unsecured messaging app, it is seemingly everywhere today. In a federal court at this very moment, a hearing in a lawsuit brought by a watchdog group against the officials who were in the Houthi PC small group. That watchdog group, American Oversight, is asking a federal judge to order them to preserve all messages. They allege that Team Trump violated laws requiring all records to be preserved. We're going to have more on that with the plaintiff of that lawsuit later. But what's happening in the courtroom? Just one of the many after effects of this whole fiasco. Both our allies and our adversaries taking a very close look at what happened, why it happened, if anything will come out of this breach of national security, and what it all says about the state of our national security right now. For our allies, the revelation of a Signal group chat in which attack plans were sent out adds to a growing pile of evidence that leads them to wonder if the United States can, in fact, be trusted. For Canada, a member of the Five Eyes Alliance of intelligence sharing and already in Trump's crosshairs, the Prime Minister said that, quote, part of that response is to be more and more Canadian in our defense capabilities, more and more Canadian in our decisions. We have to look out for ourselves. Across the Atlantic, reaction to J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth trashing our allies. An Italian paper running this headline, parasitic, mean, and an object of hate. Vance and Hegseth reveal what Trump's U.S. thinks of its NATO allies. Australia's Prime Minister striking a cautious tone, saying, quote, mistakes happen from time to time. The important thing is when something like that happens, that you identify how it happened and put in place measures to make sure it doesn't happen again. The U.S. takes security seriously, and I'm sure they will respond appropriately. But there is little sign of an appropriate response right now. Pete Hegseth, who shared attack plans that nearly every expert say is likely classified, remains in his position. He said on Wednesday, I know exactly what I'm doing. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who added Atlantic reporter Jeffrey Goldberg to that group chat, also remains at his job for now. NBC News reporting this today, quote, a growing number of Donald Trump's allies are calling on the president to fire his National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz. Regardless of what happens, our adversaries, in addition to our allies, they are also watching with close interest. As reporter Noah Shackman writes in the New York Times, if you are running the security directorate of a hostile nation, savor this moment. It has never been easier to steal secrets from the United States government. Can you even call it stealing when it's this simple? The Trump administration has unlocked the vault doors, fired half of the security guards, asked the rest to roll pennies, walk right in, take what you want. This is the golden age. And that is where we start today with Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker, plus former CIA Director, now MSNBC Senior National Security Analyst John Brennan, and with us for the hour, former Republican Congressman and MSNBC political analyst David Jolly. Director Brennan, let's level set for a second. What was shared by Pete Hegseth in that group chat, well, we're going to show it again for everyone to see here. Does it look to you like it would be classified?
Absolutely. I do think that the amount of detail that he had in there, particularly since the military operation did not yet take place when he was posting that, would have given adversaries who had compromised any of the phones that use that Signal app the ability to take measures to prevent a successful U.S. military operation. I think has been noted, the Houthis are supported very closely by Iran, and Iran has very sophisticated technical capabilities. And if any of those phones, including the Atlantic editor, Jeffrey Goldberg's phone, had been compromised earlier, if there was some type of malware on there, the Iranians could have picked it up and could have alerted the Houthis in advance. So again, I think it was a mistake. It was a bad mistake that they had this type of chat. I'm not saying that using Signal could not have been a way just to contact individuals in a benign fashion, but the fact that Pete Hegseth put this type of detail in there, and then they continually had this conversation, I think by anyone's sense of what is classified, this clearly met that test.
Peter Baker, we are in day 4 of this story. It did not have to necessarily be the dominant story of the week. The Wall Street Journal editorial board pointing out in an op-ed last night, the White House is allowing its mistake to dominate the news for days and devolve into a larger question of competence. The administration seems to think it can bully its way through anything by shouting fake news and attacking the press. Sometimes it needs to admit a mistake, take the loss, and move on, which we are happy to do. That is advice, Peter, from a right-leaning board of the Wall Street Journal. Why can't Trump take it?
Well, that doesn't exist in the Trump playbook. Admitting a mistake and saying we'll do better, and that's just not the way he rolls. He doesn't admit mistakes. Now, sometimes he admits mistakes by people around him, and he might get to that point if he decides he wants to cast aside Mike Waltz or Pete Hegseth, but there doesn't seem to be any indication of that at this point. Instead, he seems to be dug in. He's arguing that, in fact, not only was not a major mistake made, this is all trivial stuff. It's all part of the witch hunt. He's using words like hoax, which are his favorite words when it comes to any allegation against him or people around him. And you're right. It keeps the story alive by making it a combative thing rather than a matter of contrition. It just forces his opponents, or at least gives his opponents license to continue to point out how serious this really is, and to point out that the president doesn't seem to take it seriously.
Well, it is not trivial, to underscore your point there, Peter. It is not a hoax, Director Brennan. I mean, they keep focusing on this idea of how Jeffrey Goldberg got added to the chat. The point is that they should not have been conducting these types of deliberations on a platform like Signal in the first place. The addition of Jeffrey Goldberg becomes secondary to that. The fact that you have headlines coming out, you heard me read them, Canada, Italy, Australia, our allies are worried. Our allies have been concerned. If you are the head of one of those intelligence services, what are you thinking right now?
Well, I'm thinking that I'm worried that how my intelligence that I might be sharing with the United States intelligence community is being handled. But as Peter points out, I mean, the administration seems to be digging a deeper hole for themselves here. Mistakes do happen. This is a bad mistake, and I think it reflects the inexperience of a Pete Hegseth in terms of what he put on that chat. But from the standpoint of our foreign allies and partners, I think they're looking at us with great concern because they already knew that Donald Trump has a history of carelessly and recklessly handling classified information. Now, individuals who are at the helm of our national security structure, and including the National Security Advisor, the fact that they don't have the common sense to prevent something like this from happening, and then adding Jeffrey Goldberg's name to this chat makes it even worse. But I do think it reflects a broader concern because, as has been pointed out, we don't know how extensive the discussions on Signal have been, whether or not there are other issues related to Russia or China. Are we seeing just the tip of the iceberg here as far as this Houthi mission, this military operation against the Houthis was? And so I think there's a lot of questions. And now that there's going to be some investigations, the Department of Defense Inspector General will be able to look at what the Secretary of Defense and what the Pentagon did during this. But I do not believe the Inspector General is going to be given access to any of the information or any of the systems and networks and phones within the National Security Council or the White House. So I think it's going to be a limited investigation at this point, unless the White House really does, provide access to outsiders or responds to requests to make all of these chats available and to retain them as government records. Director
Brennan, talk me through why that matters.
Well, it matters from the standpoint of you want to make sure that there's going to be a firm record of all the actions that the U.S. government has taken. And by those chats, it looked as though there was authorization given previous to that chat commencing to conduct this military operation. And then the vice president started to debate whether or not it was worthy to do this or not, and the implications for, our relationship with the Europeans and others. And so it just spun out of control. And you need to make sure that you have those types of records, because in the event that something does go badly in the future, you can have the appropriate review that is done to be able to correct mistakes and to be able to ensure that such mistakes don't happen again. So I do think we're going to learn a lot more about this, but this is an issue that's not going to go away. And as I said, I think if the White House acknowledges more, it wasn't just a mistake that Jeffrey Goldberg's name was added. It was a bad move from the standpoint of putting together this Signals chat for principals to discuss in detail a military operation that was still pending.